Through the chair, you're live on HCAM TV. You're live on HCAM.
Thanks, Bob. Chair's not here yet, so no one's going to say okay, but thank you.
Also noting, John, we're short of quorum anyway, right?
I only have two people missing at this point, Gary being one of them. Sorry, three people missing, Gary being one of them, Rob and Michael. So we should have a quorum when Gary joins. We just don't have a chair or a vice chair to take over the meeting. He's texting me. He's signing on now. He has to restart his computer.
Hi, everybody. Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Great, thank you. I apologize for being late. It's been a little tumultuous afternoon and evening for me. And then of course, my Zoom wasn't working for me and I had to reboot. So I do apologize, but Happy New Year, everyone. This is Gary Trindle, Chair of the Hopkinton Planning Board, and I hereby call our January 8th, 2024 meeting to order. I'm going to quickly read through our remote meeting script. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting will be conducted via remote means in accordance with applicable law. This means that members of the public body, as well as members of the public, may access the meeting via virtual means. Participants may access this meeting through the remote meeting link as posted on the meeting agenda and through the town's online calendar. When required by law or allowed by the chair, persons wishing to provide public comment or otherwise participate in the meeting may do so by raising their hand or otherwise signaling their intent to speak. This meeting will be recorded. Please take care to mute your microphone unless you have been recognized by the chair. And we'll quickly go through our attendance of members. So when I call your name, please respond that you are present. Rob Benson?
Yep, I'm here.
Jane Moran?
Present.
Ron Prefer?
Present.
Elise Michalowski?
Present.
Matthew Ronka?
Present.
Michael King?
Present.
Mika Seth Prouty?
Present.
And our newest member, Parker Happ.
Present.
All right. Well, I don't know. We've got an administrative heavy evening this evening, but I think we've got a couple of, one in particular, really weighty, meaty topic. But from an order, I'm going to mix things up a little bit. We will actually start with the A&R just to move that through just to move that one through. And then just given public interest, we're actually going to start with the MBTA public hearing. From there, we'll go to the stormwater regulations, and then we will finish up with the minutes. So sound okay to everybody?
Gary,
Yes,
noticed
Matthew.
the minutes weren't uploaded.
Ah, yes. Thank you. Good catch. All right. So on that note, let's go ahead and get into the A&R. And John, like I always do on these, are you able to pull that up on the screen and share it with the board and the public? And do we have the applicant on the line?
I'm here from is Craig Nation. Is here.
Hey, Craig. How you doing?
Hi. Good, and you?
Good. You want to just quickly explain to us why you are before the planning board this evening?
Sure. You guys had previously approved something very similar to this, I believe, and then we went to open space after that, and then we decided to change a few things to make it better from an open space perspective. There was a parcel that they weren't so interested in, and then there was another parcel that they were more interested in instead. And then there was another little corner of what we call the corridor that we widened a little bit so that they could potentially make a trail and not be in the wetlands. So basically it's the same thing you already approved, other than it's different.
Okay.
I
John,
can point out the changes if needed, or
yeah, I think it would be helpful, and I don't. And John's got the cursor. He might be able to do that. He can either follow along with you describing it, or John might be able to walk through it as well. But maybe we'll have.
If you go up to that 45-degree angle in the middle of the plan, up, left, down, yeah, right about, yeah. Let's see. That line that's 204 feet long and next to parcel C, this was just a 100-foot corridor, we were calling it. And right around there where parcel C is labeled, we straightened out the line there there's wetlands to the left of that. So we straightened that out so that they could be out of the wet there. And then there was a parcel, John, you won't see it on that plan. It was part of the Whisper Way plan. It was called Parcel A. And it got traded. Since you're right here, though, we could look at that. Essentially, it got swapped for this triangle here that gets trail conductivity from Whisper Way, and it gives you access to that easement, and it lets Valleywood access all Cameron Woods and the trails going to Pond Street and Whisper Way and such. So they found that piece there more valuable than what we took away from the open space that was on Whisper Way. Parcel A.
Anything else?
No.
Okay. John, I think you have a recommendation on this. You want to just quickly give your comments, and then we'll see if there's any questions.
Yep. So, excuse me, since there are a lot of people on this call, I'll give you an education on ANRs. ANRs are a form of subdivision that is only in Massachusetts, and they do not have to go through the subdivision approval process as long as the lots have the required lot area and frontage under zoning, or the lots are labeled as non-buildable. So neither one of these lots have the frontage. They do have the lot area, but they don't have the frontage, so they are labeled non-buildable. Therefore, it does not constitute a subdivision under Massachusetts law, and it can be done through this process should the board vote to endorse.
All right. And on this particular one, do you have a recommendation for us?
This, this is not a subdivision. They are not creating new buildable lots. They're just modifying lot lines, and so it appears eligible for endorsement.
Yep. Okay. So, and just a little bit more detail for the public, while this was previously part of, or it's not a subdivision all in itself, but the changes themselves don't constitute a subdivision. And it's, we oftentimes use A&Rs if it's to split a lot or to swap some land from one side to the other, move property lines, that kind of thing, just to make them a little bit more useful in some capacity. Any questions from the board on this? I see none. As the name implies, this is a different process. It's not an approval, it's an endorsement. So if there's no comments, I will entertain a motion to endorse this A&R for Wood Street, Ravenwood.
So moved.
Second.
All right, any further discussion? Seeing none, Rob, how do you vote?
Yes.
Jane?
Yes.
Ron?
I'll agree for yes.
Elise?
Yes.
Matthew?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
Vigaseth?
Yes.
Parker?
Yes.
And Gary is a yes as well. All right. Thanks, Craig. Appreciate your willingness to meet with Open Space, and I'm glad that you guys were able to identify some minor modifications that help this be a more useful open space. And I should say thanks to the Open Space folks as well for putting that time in and helping make it better. So thank you all. Okay. The next agenda item for us will be actually, I'll go ahead and open up both of the public hearings. So I'll entertain a motion to open the public hearings for the amended zoning bylaws for MBTA communities, as well as the proposed amendment to stormwater regulations.
So moved.
Second.
So no further discussion. Rob, how do you vote on opening? John, gosh, I'm rusty. Do we need to vote on opening the hearing?
Yes, you do.
We do. All right. On that note, Rob, how do you vote on opening the hearing?
Rob is a yes on opening the hearing.
Jane,
Yes.
Ron,
Ron Paper, yes.
Elise,
Elise, yes.
Matthew,
Yes.
Michael,
Yes.
Vigasith,
Yes.
Parker.
Yes.
Gary is a yes as well. This is one of those few times that I wish we were in person because it's much faster ways to vote. All right. Well, let's as I mentioned before, let's go ahead and dig into the proposed amendments to the zoning bylaws for MBTA communities. John is going to kick this off with a presentation that goes through some background as well as progress as to where Zach is at this point in time. I just want to make a couple of quick comments, though. One, I just want to acknowledge all of the work that both Zach and that John Gelsich in particular have done on this. And as you'll see as John walks through it, as to where this started, what was coming our way, and I think through something like 7 different public meetings, they've been hashing through this, a lot of different considerations, a lot of input from Chamber of Commerce, from the community. I personally just think they've done an exceptional job of bringing something forward that is worth considering. I also want to say, so actually, I'll hold off on anything further. I've got a couple of other comments to make, but I'll save those for after the presentation. But from a purpose of tonight, we will not be getting to a vote on this. This will be a multi-night hearing, in part because we want to make sure that Zach has the ability to adjust or make changes based in part on the input. And secondly, because we want to make sure that people have a chance to think about this, to process it, to understand it, and then come back. This isn't something we want to rush. We want to be thoughtful. This is something that these changes will have to go before town meeting anyways. The goals tonight are really, again, to educate everyone on what MBTA Communities is, to share progress as to where we're at now. And then really it's a lot of listening on our part to see, to get people's thoughts, reactions, and ideas that they have. So, on that note, John's put together, I think, a really helpful presentation that's gonna go through what MBTA Communities is, what it isn't, as well as the current status. And then at that point, we'll open it up to questions from the board, and then we'll go ahead and entertain questions from the public.
All right. So before I start, can everyone see this presentation clearly? Is it big enough?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks great.
Great. All right. So what is an MBTA community? So a lot of you have probably heard the term MBTA community. A lot of us didn't know what it was until recently. So the state defines an MBTA community as a community that is basically served by the MBTA service, whether it's commuter rail, bus lines, rapid transit, subway, that kind of stuff. So there are 175 MBTA communities in Massachusetts. We are one of them because we are served by the Southborough commuter rail station. And this gives you a better picture as to what the MBTA communities are. There's a lot of them, and they're pretty far-reaching. The darker blue, obviously, Intercore, subway, bus lines. The other ones, the green, the light green, are mostly commuter rail. And then adjacent communities, which is what Hopkinton is. We don't have a station within our boundaries, but we are within half a mile of a station in another town. So this is just a quick timeline of the process at the state level, that the Section 3A, which is the MBTA Communities Law. went through back in 2021. Governor Baker signed the economic bond bill, which put this whole process into law. 2022, in August, they published the guidelines that we based our proposal off of, or I should say Zach's proposal off of. Later that year, they published the compliance model, which I can go into a little bit more detail, but that's kind of a complex thing. That's basically how you set up the district to make sure that it complies with the law. There's certain criteria that need to be followed, and this is how you ensure that the district that you are putting together follows those criteria. Guidelines were modified. You may have heard the mandatory mixed use component of that. That allowed for towns to require mixed use on the ground floor with residential above. But in doing so, they changed the requirements for the land area required. So you can require a certain district or sub-district have mandatory mixed use on the ground floor, but those parcels where that is on do not get counted towards the 50 acres.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you for a second here. Just for the public, can you take one step back and tell us what the state is trying to accomplish with this?
Sure.
And just before we get into, I know you've got some other slides on it, but before we get too far into the details, why are they pushing on this? What are they trying to do?
Yep. So, I mean, everyone's probably heard of the housing crisis going on in the state. This is an effort to provide zoning areas around transit to allow for denser housing. It's a planning principle that housing should be denser around transit nodes, and this is what they're trying to achieve by doing that. In the non-adjacent MBTA communities, so all of the MBTA communities that are served with a train station in their boundaries, or bus lines, or bus station, or rapid transit, subway, that type of thing, they have to have the MBTA communities zone within half a mile of the transit station. In adjacent communities like Hopkinton, there's a little bit more freedom where that zone does not have to be within a half a mile of the transit center. So we are allowed to have an MBTA communities district outside of that half mile buffer. So you'll see later, we're proposing one for downtown that is not within half a mile of the train station. So in general, and to be completely, simple on it, they're trying to create opportunities for more housing around transit. That's the main goal of this effort from the state.
And just to add a little bit more context, if you're gonna, just to reinforce John's point, if you're gonna build denser housing somewhere, and you think about somewhere in Hopkinton, where would you put it? And that's the rationale for train stations, because just from an overall infrastructure perspective, access, transportation. But the catch here is that the state also knows that if they just leave it up to local municipalities to consider dense housing, that it in most situations doesn't get done. And so the state is actively, through this proposal, is effectively pushing or forcing towns to accommodate this, because they know that the likelihood of municipalities doing it all on their own is relatively low.
Good. All right, thanks, Gary. So just getting back to that, sorry for the in the weeds already that I'm getting into this timeline, but I just want to kind of head off some questions before I know they're going to come up. So I addressed this mandatory mixed use issue because it definitely seems very attractive to a lot of towns. And we spoke to the two people that are at the state level reviewing these plans as they come in for towns to try and understand the mandatory mixed use. And it is actually disadvantageous to Hopkinton to have something like this because it require our district to be much bigger. The density may have to be higher in certain areas. And so while it does sound like it would be a great idea for the downtown area, it would actually kind of go against what we're trying to do with this proposal. So that's why we don't have it in our proposal. Other towns and cities do. So I just want to head that off before, and I can go into that a little bit more if people have questions, but I just want to head that issue off before we get to it. And then the last two pieces are the deadlines for adoption of this zoning. Rapid transit and bus service communities, the inner core, They had to do it by the end of last year. We have until December 31st of this year. But as many of you know, Hopkinton only has one annual town meeting. We don't always have a special town meeting in the fall, so we can't rely on that being an option. So that's why we're taking care of it. We're trying to take care of it in annual town meeting so that we don't have to worry about trying to get something for fall town meeting. So what does the MBTA Communities District mean in Hopkinton? So as Gary had mentioned before, this really focuses on zoning. It provides towns the ability to establish these zones within the certain parameters that the state has laid out. It does not require these units to be constructed in order for the town to comply. Once the zoning is adopted, and it's a compliant zoning district, that town would be considered compliant. The units could never be built, and the town would still remain compliant. These regulations and this law does not relate to 40B. It has nothing to do with affordable housing. There is an opportunity, which Hopkinton is taking advantage of, to require affordable housing as part of it. But affordable, capital A affordable, deed restricted affordable, as we like to call it, is not a part of this. The state does not put a requirement in for that. It allows the towns to do that, but it does not require for that. So as I had mentioned before, we are incorporating our inclusionary zoning bylaw into this. There's a slight change right now. The way that our inclusionary bylaw is written, you can round up for units. MBTA communities won't let you do that, so you just have to round down for any development. So we can go into more detail about that, but again, I want to try and stay out of the weeds on this. And then any MBTA community has to comply or they risk losing funding under certain sources. MassWorks is one of them. I'm trying to remember. There's 13 grants that now will make towns ineligible if they don't comply, and a certain number other that will use it as their decision criteria on grants. And then the Massachusetts Attorney General issued a letter, I want to say probably about a year ago at this point, saying that even if the funding issue isn't what is going to drive the adoption of this, they do want to let everyone know that it could open up towns to fair housing lawsuits. So that's just another thing to consider when you look at this. So how does this apply to Hopkinton specifically? Near the Southborough train station, we're actually within half a mile of the station. A significant portion of that area of town is within half a mile. So we are required to establish this district. We can put it anywhere, as I mentioned before. It doesn't have to be within that half-mile buffer. And we do not have to do anything about the Ashland commuter rail because that is more than half a mile away from Hopkinton's border. So we really only have to worry about Southborough's train station as our compliance issue. So these are some of the general requirements of the MBTA communities. You have to establish a district of a reasonable size that's at least 50 acres. The district has to be at least 15 units per acre as of right for multifamily housing, and that's a minimum gross density. So what that means is, as you'll see in the presentation, we have two sub-districts that make up our one district. So the combination of the two sub-districts have to meet 15 units per acre. They don't individually have to meet 15 units per acre. Just the gross density of the entire MBTA community district does. It has to allow for at least 750 units under the zoning. Again, these don't have to be constructed. They just have to be zoned. There can be no age restrictions, so we can't do age-restricted housing, 55 plus. It has to be family friendly. You can't prevent children from being in any of these units. And the units have to be legally and practically allowed. So the state has compiled this GIS shapefile that allows for developable area, takes out the wetlands, takes out other land. And so in our compliance model, we had to factor all that in. And so that should be taken care of just through the process, but you can't just design something in a way that these units could never possibly be built because it's just not buildable land. The state doesn't want that. So what is the current status in Hopkinton? Zach, Zoning Advisory Committee, drafted a proposal, and you'll see that soon. It's two parts. It's the bylaw and the zoning map. As Gary had mentioned, Zach has met 7 times in public meetings since June to review the proposal, talk about the different parcels that may be included, edit the bylaw, and just talk about all that kind of stuff. They received input from members of the chamber, local developers, residents, other community members. And we have been awarded a technical assistance grant from Mass Housing to review what we've done currently to make sure that we are compliant. We do not have to pay for this. This is paid for by Mass Housing Partnership. And the person who's going to actually be reviewing it is the one who drafted the model bylaw. So she's the one that should probably know the most about all of this. So we're very excited to get that process started and make sure that we are compliant. We believe we are, and we think the review will show that. And then the state has another separate review process to ensure compliance, but that process takes about 3 months. So we want to make sure that we're compliant before then, because we may not get that review back by the state before town meeting, because there's a ton of towns doing this and they're definitely bogged down in that process. So getting to the proposal, this is the original iteration of the map. In order to be initially compliant in January of 2022, we had to identify preliminary districts. These did not have to be final. They did not have to move forward. We just had to identify them to show the state that we were actually thinking about it. So the colors in here reflect that. The purple were the preliminary proposed districts. The orange were districts added on, or parcels added on to the district. So really no difference between the two. It's just the timing indicates what color they are. So that was July.
And actually, John, you want to just we can probably quickly name these parcels,
Sure.
and you can circle them better than, I mean, you have the
Yep.
cursor, but
Can you see my
just to
cursor?
orient people.
Can you see my cursor?
Yep.
Okay. So we've got the Carbonis property up here with 2 adjacent parcels. You've got the Preserve and Forest Lane over here, condominium association, Center School, Elmwood School. This is an industrial district over on Parkwood Drive. This is the Windsor at Hopkinton, the 40B development, the apartment complex. This is the industrial district on South Street. And this is, I want to say, it's not 52 South Street. It's I forget what number, but one of the old Dell properties on South Street. All right, I'm going to stop here. Any questions from anybody? Okay. So in August, we kind of did a little bit more refining, added a downtown district, added Walcott Valley, I think it's apartments or condos.
Hey, John,
Added,
I had a question. Sorry, it's Mike.
sure.
So the ones that aren't immediately next to like the commuter rail station, what would make them compliant with this law?
So the location for Hopkinton doesn't affect compliance.
Okay, so it just has to be an area in the town.
Yes.
Okay.
And it has to meet the gross density, the lot area, and the number of units. Location does not matter in Hopkinton.
So Michael, originally when this was put together, it needed to be within a certain distance from the train station, but they realized that there was, in many cases, it was just not practical. It goes back to that idea of it, it needs to be buildable in some capacity. And so they in turn opened it up and said, okay, you can zone for this elsewhere as long as it makes sense to do so.
Okay.
If I may, John, jump in through the chair. But again, if you're looking, because we have not much public transportation to get to the South Station, would it not defeat the spirit of the actual law by having it anywhere else but up near the train station, to allow those that are working in Boston to get to Boston or get to Worcester, even though because we do have the ability, and there's other areas, but it just sort of defeats the purpose of what by my understanding, what Governor Baker's law was meant to do, was to allow those that work in Boston not to have to live in Boston.
Yep. So, that's absolutely true. And so that kind of factored into the discussion. One of the things that I found out relatively recently in the last couple months is that I want to say it's Metro West Regional Transit Authority, the one that operates the bus lines through Ashland that go into Hopkinton, is actually, I think, proposing, I don't know the timing, proposing a north-south route along Cedar Street to go from Southborough down through Hopkinton. And there is a current Metro West Regional Transit Authority bus line that goes east-west on Main Street. I think it ends at Shoppers at the grocery store, and I'm completely blanking on the name right now.
Price Chopper.
Price Chopper, there we go. And it actually has a stop in downtown at the Four Corners. And I'm talking to the 495 partnership person right now to see how we can better advertise that stop, because it's not even listed as downtown Hopkinton on the maps. It's listed as Route 135, Route 85 intersection, which doesn't make any sense. So yes, it does, to your point, Ronnie, create a situation where maybe that this wouldn't be beneficial. But as you'll see, what Zach is proposing, it will be served by public transit to get you to the train station at some point in the near future. And that's been something that a lot of planners have brought up to the state is, you know, you want us to put these MBTA zoning districts in place, but the service for the MBTA ridership is not there yet. And so it's already taxed, right? It's already overtaxed with the ridership, and you're not getting reliable service. And now you're asking us to put more units with more people there. So that's the conversation we're having with the state of, you know, if you want this to happen and you want us to put this in place in our towns, you need to step up the service for MBTA to serve these developments. And so I think that's happening. I think that conversation is happening, that thinking is happening. And as you'll see as we move forward, Hopkinton's proposal will be served by public transit, even though there's no sidewalk all along Cedar Street to get to the train station. There will be a bus line at some point in the near future.
Hey, John, and I know there's two other people with their hands raised. And if there are questions that go back to the earlier stuff, then let's get those. I'm happy to take those now, but I'd rather get through to where the current iteration is on the map, just so that we don't, so people don't get too hung up on this earlier iteration, because what's shown on the screen right now is not where we're currently at in the process. So, Elise, did you have a question at a higher level, not map specific?
Yeah, I was just curious if the areas, if we zone them where like existing apartments already are, like the Windsor, would that count towards the numbers that they require? Because that's already pretty dense right there. Or would it have to be just like rebuilt?
So that was a point of conversation. You can just rezone the already developed properties. It does not have to be torn down and rebuilt. And Zach definitely talked about that. They moved away from the Windsor to the proposal that they have now. But one example of that being the case is the Preserve up on Forest Lane off of Cedar Street is an existing condominium complex. In the proposal, it's proposed to be zoned MBTA communities. It does not have to be torn down. They don't have to add any units to it. They still control the land. They still control their development. It won't change compliance, and it won't change the Preserve unless they want it to change.
So let's get through and get to the current map, and then I think that'll probably help funnel our questions a little bit.
All right, so back to August, added downtown district, added Walcott Valley, added this parcel over here, and then just did some calculation on the areas. And then this was a little bit more refined. It removed some parcels, took away the South Street parcels because we didn't want to take existing industrially zoned land, move it to residential to then lose that industrial zone land for the foreseeable future. You know, for industrially zoned land is minimal in Hopkinton. So removing that from the equation may be detrimental to Hopkinton's economic future. So we took that out. Took away Center School because that's a different conversation that the town wanted to have and didn't want to lump it in with this. And then changed the downtown district a little bit and removed some of the parcels on Parkwood Drive. And this was even more refined, removed all the properties on South Street. mostly the same. And here's the current proposal, and I'm going to zoom in. Can you see it, or should I zoom in?
Let's zoom in a little bit.
You know what? Actually, I won't zoom in because I forgot I have another slide that will help. So here's the current proposal, and these are the two districts or sub-districts. So you have Preserve, Carbones, and then 2 residential properties over here, and then the downtown district. So this is the post office. This parcel at the end over here is the fire station. And this parcel that's not included is the church. So I believe the Mason Hall, excuse me, is the end of that district. And then this is A Street up here. And we preserved these residential parcels up here to preserve the residential nature of A Street. So those residential parcels up here are not included in the district, so that the frontage of A Street could remain residential. Single family residential. Those are the proposed sub-districts. So this is a little bit more detail of that. So it's the Upper Cedar Street sub-district, which is the one that's near the train station, and then the downtown sub-district. We utilize the Commonwealth's model to make sure that these comply, and I'll show you a summary in the next few slides to show how those comply. So it's a little confusing how the law is written versus how we have to actually implement it. It requires a density, but you can't set a density in the zoning. You set the density by establishing the dimensional requirements, and then that allows for a certain number of units on those parcels, which then computes the density. So it's not like we put something into the bylaw that says you can do no more than 15 units per acre in this parcel. It's you set the dimensions, and then that gives you what your density would be. So it's a little bit of playing here and there of, what can we make work? And the dimensional requirements that we used for these districts, slightly modified, were the Residence A for the Upper Cedar Street sub-district. It's currently in the A district, the agricultural district. And then slightly modified the existing for downtown sub-district. So the things that we changed include lot coverage, made lot coverage a little bit higher, just to be able to fit enough of the units on, should they be developed, in order to comply. Change the frontage so that existing lots could work. And then we required open space, which wasn't previously required. And we changed lot size for certain areas, which really shouldn't affect it because we're doing larger parcels. So you're not going to necessarily subdivide the preserve into a 15,000 square foot parcel, but we had to do that in order to make the bylaw comply. So this is the proposed unit capacity, and this is the summary from the state's compliance model. So we basically just plug the numbers in and it spit this out for us. So right now, currently, the final unit capacity is 814 units. So the minimum is 750, but the way that the area, the setbacks, the dimensions, all that kind of played into the calculation, spit out 814 potential units. So we would meet in that capacity. And here's a little bit more of a detail for the two districts and the total. So this shows how everything complies with the 3 criteria. So you've got the dwelling units per acre, or sorry, I'll say again, the final unit capacity per district has to be 750. We're at 815 or 814. The density per acre. So again, this downtown is actually lower than the 15 units, but the higher level at the Upper Cedar Street allows us to get 16.7 units per acre. And then the total acreage up here, 58.4 acres, that allows us to comply with at least the minimum of 50 acres for the district. And even though this one's a little bit lower, this 48.6, they don't use that as the compliance. It's the 58.4. So what are the next steps? We continue this process, as Gary had mentioned. This is going to be a multi-meeting discussion. The planning board can still make changes. This is not final. This is just a recommendation from Zach. So the planning board can modify it if they so choose. But we want to make sure that any of those changes don't impact compliance. So while we are at 814 units and 58.4 acres and a little bit over what the requirements are, that's mostly a function of just trying to make it all work together and it's really, really hard to get right at the minimum level. It's really hard to get at the 50 acres and still comply because of the way that the parcels are laid out. So we've, toyed with it a little bit, but we can toy with it a little bit more, but we just want to make sure that any of those changes, as minor as they are, don't impact the potential compliance. So we have to submit, we don't have to, but we will submit a draft proposal to the Commonwealth for review. But like I said, this takes quite a while, so we want to get this in as early as possible in order to get the okay from the state. But we're pretty confident that the technical assistance consultant will give us really good advice and make sure that we're confident that we comply, even if we don't get any information back from the state before town meeting. And then the final step is bringing it to town meeting in May for a vote. And I just want to point out that under the bond bill and the Housing Choice Initiative that Governor Baker signed into law, developments like this or initiatives like this that allow for as of right multifamily development in eligible locations reduces the town meeting vote to a simple majority rather than a 2/3 majority for zoning. So this will only need a simple majority at town meeting to pass. And because it meets that criteria at the state level to reduce that requirement. And that is the end of my presentation, but I'm sure there are plenty of questions, and I'm happy to answer any of them.
So, John, why don't you go to the map detail? That's probably the one, yeah, and I'm guessing people might have some preliminary questions there. Just so that people know from a process perspective, we will get to the public questions and comments. We're gonna work through the planning board members themselves first, and then we'll get to the public. By all means, you can keep your hands raised, and I'll keep your place in line. But I do want to get through the planning board piece first. And then I actually am just going to make a couple of preliminary comments here. And I mentioned that I like the work that they've done here. And I just want to provide some commentary from my perspective. And the first is that I really think that what they've done here is in the spirit of the bylaw. And case in point, the two biggest land masses are very close to the MBTA station. There's some, so I think that makes sense. And then I think in the downtown area, if we had to build and had to find another place to build some denser housing, certainly downtown is where that should be. The second reason that I think this makes sense is, to me, this is very long-term minded. And I want to make sure that people don't get too caught up in the numbers here, because, there are limitations or considerations with all of these properties. And so, for example, if you look at the ones down by the train station, there is no sewer capacity down there. There is no water capacity. And the sewer capacity in particular, at this point in time, is a substantial limiter to what can be built. It's really hard to do 15 units per acre if you don't have any sewer. And then, with the preserve, and I think, again, that's in the category of, well, what's the likelihood of them, of the owners of that selling it and rebuilding it? Probably pretty low. But again, just being in the spirit and being long-term minded, that just creates the opportunity at some point in the future. And then the downtown section, I think this is really interesting because, people hear, 15 units per acre, that can be really difficult to manage. The reality of it is that our current downtown zoning, if it's mixed use, allows for 22 units per acre. So the reality of it is that the total density, the total number of housing units that you get with this zoning is actually slightly less than what's allowable by right now. The catch is that to do that denser build that's allowable right now, it has to be mixed use. So it's got to have commercial retail on the first floor, which for us is preferable downtown. So and then I think so those are kind of the three themes that I think is it's definitely complies with the intent of the bylaw. to me, it certainly is very long-term minded, and then I think these are the right places to focus on this type of objective. But yet, the short and medium-term impact is pretty low. We're not all these parcels will have challenges, and the likelihood of something big being built on any of these at this point in time is relatively low. So as we think about school impact and service impact, that we don't anticipate very much of that. So that's just kind of my synopsis of it. And again, I said I'd start with the planning board members. Ronnie.
Yeah, through the chair. So thank you both, John, and you, Bill, for giving a bit of a background. Firstly, of the two things shown on the screen here, by the Southborough Station in logical sense, no question, no qualms about that. Again, I like the analysis of long-term thinking. Yeah, there's problems with sewer, but where there's a problem, potential solution. My concern is with the downtown, and maybe I missed something, but I'm looking at this. Okay, so what does that mean for Hopio, Blues Pizza, the CVS, all these, the gas stations? I just missing something here. Like, how can we have homes where there's businesses? And then maybe I just missed what you were saying about that there, John, if you wouldn't mind enlightening me.
So just to be clear, this is a zoning district. This isn't a plan for development. So
exactly,
nothing has to happen with any of these parcels if the owners don't want to sell. If Hopio, the owner of Hopio, wants to stay there, nothing is compelling them to sell their property to have it developed. This is only for any property owner that wants to redevelop their land under MBTA communities, just like any other zoning. It doesn't compel the developers, property owners, whoever, to do anything with their land if they don't want to. So I guess in that example, Hopio has residences above it, if I remember correctly. And so a developer could come in and build something very similar to what already exists there. I don't know why they would, but they could. CVS, if whoever owns that land wants to tear down CVS and build a development, they would be able to under this, but I don't know if CVS would want to sell, right? So it's hard to answer your question because we don't know the plans of any of these individual landowners, but this just zones the land to allow for that. If somebody wanted to develop CVS now, like Gary said, with 22 units per acre, I'm assuming that's the correct density, they could. They would just have to make the ground floor retail or commercial. Under MBTA communities, you don't have to do that. It can be multifamily, but you still could. You could develop.
John, is it allowed? Again, I know there's difference in, like, again, Canada is different than the US, but I remember you cannot build homes above a former gas station for at least 50 years because of the underground tank that was underneath the original gas station that could have leakage.
I don't know of any. Yeah, I don't know of any prohibition on that. I do know that you have to basically ensure that there's no contamination of the soil. But I don't know if there's a prohibition for a certain number of years, even if that soil is determined to be not contaminated or all the contaminated soil is removed from the site. I'm not an LSP, so I don't know all the details about that. But I'm not aware of any long-term prohibition on any kind of development on a previous gas station.
Okay, again, it could be a different.
As long as it's all remediated, I can't imagine why it would be an issue.
All right, Elise.
Thanks. I think Zach has done a great job on this. I have a question about the downtown area for John. With this zoning, could people still potentially build businesses on like a first floor with residences above them? I know that would cut some of the counting, when you're counting like the square footage and doing the math for how many units would be in there, but could they still, like, if someone bought out, let's say someone bought out the whole strip on Main Street and they just put like all businesses on the bottom and then had like 1 or 2 floors of residences above that, would that still work with the calculations?
So that's allowed right now. That's under the current underlying zoning. This is just an overlay. This doesn't change the base zoning. This just adds another opportunity on top of what already exists there. So whatever you can do downtown currently, you would still be able to do.
Oh, okay. Okay, got it. Thanks.
Yep.
Other questions or comments from planning board members before I open it up to the public? Okay, let's go to the public, and I think the first one I see on my list is Don Jackson. If you can unmute yourself, and I will say for members of the public, just make sure to start with your name and your address. It is required that you are a Hopkinton resident to participate.
Thank you. This is Donald Jackson. I reside at 4 Lincoln Street in Hopkinton, so adjacent to the Upper Cedar Street district that's being discussed. I want to follow up actually on a comment you made, Mr. Trendle, about the lack of municipal water and sewer. And it's still unclear to me if somebody was to buy those properties, and in particular Carbones was listed for sale just a couple of years ago, what actually determines the density to which they could build under the current infrastructure? And how do we ensure that there are no impacts on water supply to existing residents in the vicinity?
It's a great question. Any development, particularly if it's going to rely on septic systems in some capacity, would go before the Conservation Commission, and there is a pretty comprehensive analysis that's done by them, and I think it's very common that they actually mandate or dictate changes in subdivisions based on that. So I'm not going to pretend I know all of the details. I will say that I think we have a member of CONCOM here on the line that could give you more details if you want, but there's a full peer review, peer engineering review, and quite a bit of analysis to make sure that it doesn't have any meaningful consequences.
Gary, can I jump in?
Yep, please.
Yeah, just sorry to correct you. It's the Board of Health that oversees the septics, not CONCOM.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But CONCOM, but that, I guess maybe the Board of Health weighs in through the CONCOM process then? Because I
if there's
know I've
wetlands,
seen...
it could go before CONCOM. But to answer Mr. Jackson's point, sorry, any development that doesn't have public infrastructure in terms of utilities has to do perk tests. They have to have leaching fields for their septic. They have to basically engineer this whole system for both water and sewer, or water and septic, in order to make sure that what they're proposing can be supplied by what they have on site. And in terms of wells, when they perk wells, there's a certain flow rate, and it's a lot more technical than I can get into because it's not my area of expertise, but they basically have to prove that the well can support the proposed development as well as not detrimentally affecting the neighboring areas that may also rely on that water supply. So that's like a whole development process outside of zoning that they would have to make sure that they are working within local bylaws and state bylaws and regulations in order to make sure that what they're proposing will work. So they will be allowed to do a density under MBTA communities should this be approved at 20 units per acre up there, I believe. But in reality, if their development calculations don't work out to that density, they can't build that. They just can't support it. And so there's a bunch of variables that come into play with, well, what can you actually put there? And it kind of depends on the developer the site itself, what it can support, the water, the septic area. I mean, soils on site are going to really make the calculation for how big their septic area needs to be very variable. If they have certain types of soils, it has to be much bigger than if they had other types of soils. So a lot of those different variables come into play when you say, well, what can you do on this site? And we really don't know until somebody does all that work.
Thank you.
All right, Peter.
Hi, thank you, Gary. Peter Thomas, 215 Pond Street. I have a couple of a comment and then a question. The first thing is that the current MWRA proposal has water running right down, right? That would be the transit route for the connection to the MWRA. So there will be water there at some point. Whether there will be sewer, I think, is another question. And this gets into the question, the root of the question. We've talked a lot about the spirit of the law and whether we're complying and showing good faith. And I think by, locating these next to the train station, it makes a lot of sense. But from a practical standpoint, are we not still exposed to a lawsuit? Because we're essentially putting two properties, the Preserve and Carbonis, they would essentially be ineligible for building because there is not a sewer infrastructure to support the density. So in other words, it can never really be developed for that. So do we still risk the legal action for non-compliance or sort of like you did a good job, but it really is untenable for a builder? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yes. And I guess just maybe I can take a shot at that, and John can correct me when I misspeak again. Number one, we've gotten a lot of input from the state on this, and we feel pretty good that they wouldn't challenge it in that regard. The second point that I would make is that, to your point, it might not be viable now, but to your point, could sewer eventually run? Could there be some sewer capacity at some point there? It's possible. Could there be technological advantages that enable on-site filtration and treatment that isn't impactful? It could happen. We do see technology improvement there. So to me, that's where this comes into long-term play, and again in the immediate sense, pretty unlikely, because the cost of doing that would be very substantial and likely undermine the financials of the project. But long term, as the property becomes more valuable and as technology improves, then by all means, something could eventually be built there.
Thank you. I have a second question, but I'll lower my hand and then wait for others to go.
Okay. John, anything to add to that? Does that make?
No, I think that was good. The only thing I would add is, and I'm just going to scroll back up to the map. I think that's a good point, Peter, but with all of these communities needing to comply, I can guarantee you several of these out here do not have any kind of public infrastructure. And if the state was trying to get these communities to comply and if having no infrastructure where those districts would mean non-compliance and opening them up to a suit, the state would have to address that, because I can tell you right now, Harvard probably does not have any sewer or water lines in town. The state has told us directly the towns are not responsible for providing utilities to these developments. The developers can always pay to put in sewer if they wanted to. If they think that's worth their development money, that's always an option. But the town itself is not compelled to provide those services. So I don't, from what I understand, I've heard from the state, that would not open us up. That fact alone would not open us up to any kind of fair housing lawsuits.
All right, Thomas.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Tom Ellsworth. I'm an attorney at Marcus Sirico, Emmer Brooks and Braintree. And our client.
Sorry, Thomas. Can you state your name and your address?
Yeah, Thomas Aylesworth. My address is 45 Braintree Hill Office Park in Braintree, but I'm the attorney for the Preserve Condominium on Forest Lane in Hopkinton. And so I'm here to speak on behalf of my clients at the Preserve. And basically, I have a comment, and that is that it seems to me that choosing the Preserve condominium as a location for the redistricting it seems to be an odd choice. And the reason that I'm saying that is because I understand the position the town's in. I've reviewed Section 3A and what's intended to do and what the requirements are, so I get it. But the point about the Preserve condominium is that there is virtually zero chance that that property will have a change of use or will somehow be developed anytime in our lifetimes and beyond. And the reason is because under the Condominium Act in Massachusetts, to dissolve a condominium requires a 75% vote of the unit owners, and to add units to the condominium requires a 100% vote of the unit owners. And my firm, we're in the business of representing condominiums. We represent somewhere around 5,000 or 6,000 condominiums in New England. It never happens, except in extraordinary circumstances that are really rare. And so I guess my point is that, understanding the position the town's in, so don't get me wrong, I do get that. You have to create this zone under Section 3A. But this condominium use, choosing that parcel as part of this new zone does seem to me to defeat sort of the intent, because it will never change its use not in our lifetimes, not in 100 years, so that it would assist in creating the density that the state is looking for. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for letting me speak tonight.
All right. And I should just clarify the public. Normally in public comment, we do require, we do only allow that for residents, but I think in this case, as a representative of a larger organization, it seems reasonable to me. I'm just curious though. So, and I understand your point that maybe the likelihood of this being built is relatively low, but as a representative of the condo association, why would that concern you?
Because my clients are concerned, because anytime that there's a government action like this that I'm saying targets them, not in a negative sense, but they're targeted in an actual sense, right? It just causes concern that what comes next, right? So now they're in the zone, and it seems like for no particularly effective reason, will there be some kind of mandate down the road that requires them to do something? And so it creates a level of concern about the unknown.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you.
Amy.
Hi, Amy Ritterbusch, 54 Grove Street. I just had a couple of clarifying questions and comments. So I noticed in the downtown district, one of the parcels is the town hall, which is in the historic district. And I think I heard this during a ZAC meeting, but I just want to clarify that the historic district purview over the facade and things visible from the street trumps the MBTA Communities Act. So even though even though somebody could build a bunch of housing units on the same site, the historic district would still have purview over the building portions that can be seen from the street.
I'm going to defer to John on that.
So my understanding is that historic is under a separate set of regulations and laws than zoning is. So if historic has jurisdiction over certain factors of a site, zoning's not going to change that.
Okay, thank you. I think that's what I heard in one of your ZAC meetings. And then the other thing I just wanted to ask, and I'm guessing it's true since a lot of people are here, but the abutters of all these parcels for tonight's hearing were notified, right?
Correct.
Okay, and I see a lot of them on the Zoom, so I figured that was the case. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Amy. Shahidul.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Shahidul Manan, 274 Ash Street. My question is regarding the economic incentives or punitive impacts. If you can help us understand and elaborate for everyone's understanding, what does it mean in terms of the non-compliance from bond bill perspective that you mentioned? And also if there are any other economic incentive attached to it or possibility of it that you may have heard of. I heard of some, but I haven't got any confirmation. That would be helpful. But wonderful presentation, and thank you for elaborating on such an important topic.
John, do you want to take that question? I know you were doing some research into that earlier.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the state presentation. I believe they list them.
Mr. Chair, I have the list right here if it's helpful.
Yeah, I don't have it right in front of me right now, so that would be faster.
Thanks, Peter.
There are 13 of them, and they're community grant programs, community planning grants, the Massachusetts Downtown Initiative, Urban Agenda, Rural and Small Town Development Fund, Brownfields Redevelopment Fund, Site Readiness Program, Underutilized Properties Program, Collaborative Workspace Program, Real Estate Services Technical Assistance, Commonwealth Places Programs, Land Use Planning Grants, Local Acquisitions for Natural Diversity Grants, and Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Planning Grants. Those are the 13 programs that the Healy-Driscoll administration has said they will withhold funds from for communities that do not comply.
Okay. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
Shahidul, does that answer your question?
It does. Thanks very much, Peter, on elaborating on that. Is there any incentive that we know of?
What do you mean by incentive?
These are more existing ones that may become restricted, but is there any additional incentive for compliance for opening up and building new? There were conversations about it, but I haven't heard from anyone about it or confirmed information on it. So maybe there is not, but just wanted to check.
Yeah, I haven't heard of any positive incentives of some kind. You know, the state is, you know, they have taken legal action in several communities. Some of those are still in process. Some of them are not. So there's some variability there. And they've also alluded to tying more to it in the future, but again, that would be speculative in nature. And I think the reality of it is it likely depends on how communities like ours progress down this journey. I think if they feel like that the majority of communities are still pushing back, then they certainly can increase the financial pressure on towns to do so. So, Rob, I think you had something to say.
Yeah, can I chime in here? Because I was curious about the same thing, so I contacted our town accounting department today, and the only funding we've received is from MassWorks of any of these funds, at least that they could identify, and that's just from being told by other town department people that work in town hall. So I found an online resource, and so we haven't received anything from MassWorks from 2017 through now, according to the MassWorks website. They list town by town who's received funding. So I am really curious of the financial impacts because, from what I can find and what I've been told, it really doesn't exist. So there's the risk of lawsuits and whatever that might bring. But I think we owe the town, when it comes to town meeting, to really know precisely what the financial impacts could be.
Yeah, I agree with you. Which town department was able to pull that for you?
I think her name was Maureen in the town accounting. She handles grants and funding, or Maureen or Megan. It was just a brief call.
Okay. Okay, but I agree with you. I think that's something that we should know as to, you know, the last couple of years, how much support has Hopkinton received from these programs that would be impacted. Amanda.
Hi, thank you. Amanda Fargiano, 17 Tamara Lane. Just a question. I don't think I've fully understood the 25% mixed use discussion up front. I wanted to circle back to that. Like, is there any way that we could use the downtown parcel and retain the mixed use component? We're already like 8% over in our units. Like, what would it take? How many more units beyond what we've already gone in excess would we need to do? And do we look at other parcels so that we could retain that mixed use requirement in the downtown zone?
John, that's getting into the details again. I know you're more familiar with that 25% mixed use component than I am.
Yeah, so I'm a little confused at what you're asking. So let me go back and explain. So the mandatory mixed use component of MBTA communities is an option that towns can do, but in doing so, that land that would be mandatory mixed use is not counted under certain criteria. So you'd have to make the districts larger in order to meet your 50 acres, or you know, if you remove those parcels but keep the density, then the other factors might change, right? So it's kind of a balancing act when you say, okay, these are going to be mandatory mixed use, but then how does that affect our compliance? And you know, when we were talking to the 3A, I forget what their name is, the people at the state, the two people at the state who basically review these and administer the whole program. When we were talking to them about how that would play out specifically in Hopkinton, it just did not seem to make sense, given that Zach was trying to get as close to the minimum requirements of all the different categories as possible. That would make us have to make a larger district, potentially higher densities in certain areas, and then potentially have a larger unit count, because those parcels that would be mandatory mixed use may not be counted towards that criteria, and all the math just wouldn't add up. So currently, under the existing zoning, which is going to remain and somebody could still develop under, you can do mixed use. It's just by special permit. That's why it doesn't comply with MBTA communities. MBTA communities has to be by right. No special permits, no ZBA approvals, anything like that. It has to be by right. So current zoning allows for higher density, mixed use, but by special permit. Or sorry, not by special permit, but
yeah, I was going to say, John,
criteria.
Current downtown zoning allows for higher density mixed use by right.
Right, correct. Yeah, there was some other factor that made that not, and I'm not remembering it at the moment, but made that district not compliant as it currently stood with MBTA communities. So that's why we had to do an overlay versus just using the current underlying zoning as the district.
But just to clarify, so with the overlay, everything that's orange in downtown could be 100% residential?
Could be, yes, but it could also be mixed use.
Yeah, I gotcha. Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
We're hopeful that if someone wants to develop and put residential in there, that they would opt for the mixed use option, which gives them more density. And maybe that's wishful thinking, but you know, we know that residential is where the money is right now. So denser housing should be a financial incentive for them to do that. Eric. And Eric, you're muted. Just got to unmute yourself there.
Okay, there we go. Hi, Eric Wieland. I am on the board at the Preserve. And I just have a question about...
Sorry, Eric, just for our records, can you give us your address?
Oh, sure. 13 Forest Lane.
Thank you.
Sure. I'm just curious, And I've followed this, and I understand everything what the board has done, planning board has been doing, and understood that these two pieces of property, the preserve and Carbones, is closest to the station. Have you actually come down and walked the properties, looked at them? I'm just curious because Carbones is up against the state park. There's a lot of wetlands, right? Excuse me? There's a lot of wetlands in that area. We have wetlands here at the preserve. Where the buildings, a lot of ledges here as well. I'm just curious, is that not important at this point? You're just picking it because it's a big parcel? How does that work? How do you come about to what's your criteria or scrutiny when you come up with these properties?
Yeah, it's a great question. The wetlands are certainly considered because that's non-buildable land, right. So that does factor into it. To your question of a site walk, we have not done a formal site walk, and I think to do so we would also need property of the landowners to do so. I guess at this point I'm not sure. I'm open to it if we wanted to try and schedule that. I'm not sure how much that would change things, but I guess I'm looking to the members of the board if they think a site walk would be useful here, and if it was, then we could certainly make a request.
Okay, you mentioned
the property owners.
You mentioned earlier about the property being buildable. That's what I was asking.
I'm sorry, Eric. Can you repeat that?
You mentioned earlier about the property being buildable. The parcels need to be buildable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah. Well, all of those parcels have buildings on them currently today.
Yes. Yes, they do, but not to the scale of the MBTA plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Understood. And I and again, I guess I'd push back a little bit that we have a lot of wetland in Hopkinton. Most large parcels have a portion of that, and so I don't think there's anything necessarily. To John's comments earlier, they do look at the percentage of the lot or the land that is wet and protected. But I struggle with calling any of those lots as non-buildable. And part of that is because they all have buildings on them today.
Through the chair, can I just weigh in as well?
Yep, of course.
So the way that we went about this whole review and compliance model process, the state factors in the wetlands. They have a shapefile on GIS, takes the undevelopable land of each parcel out, and that is not calculated as part of the compliance model. So all the wetlands are not calculated as part of land that can be developed. It's not the town's responsibility to figure out how a developer can develop a parcel of land. That's up to them. We are going by the state criteria as to what we can include in this district, and all of the land that we have included complies with what the model allows us to have it as. So I understand you have concerns as to what really is buildable, but we are going about this through the state's process, and the state's process is telling us that if we zone these areas as we have them zoned currently, we will most likely, unless we're missing something, be compliant, because their data is telling us that that would be compliant under their regulations.
So, okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Eric.
Yep.
And I keep looking down and I see Ted Barker Hook, and Ted is the chair of ZAC, and I told him I was going to defer questions about specific properties to him, of which I have not done. But Ted, before we get to the last couple of questions, and just from a timing perspective, we'll take the two more folks that have their hands raised. But Ted, any perspective from your end as you've been involved in working through these different revisions and the specifically the properties and parcels that we ended up with?
I don't know if I have anything I can recap. I think that you and John, and then with the help of the questions, have done a great job hitting just about everything we talked about over all the many months. I know that as I talk to other people, one concern I heard is people were interpreting this bylaw, the MBTA Communities Act, to somehow lead to eminent domain and properties were going to be confiscated from people, and that we must make sure that all of these units are being built. And none of that is true. As we went through our process, we were keenly aware of how concerned most residents in the town are about the growth we've already experienced and the strains that it's put on different aspects of the town, particularly the schools. We were also keenly aware that we wanted to be in compliance with this law. And that's what that was the main balancing act we tried to hit. So as we looked at what would be approvable from the Commonwealth, part of what we were asking is, are we going to see development there immediately? Are we going to add to the explosive growth that we've seen? And we didn't want to add to the explosive growth, but we wanted to be approved and we wanted to be in the spirit of the bylaw. So as we look at the preserve specifically, I think I agree with council that right now, I'm not a developer, but we did have a developer speak to us and say, I don't see any of these properties you guys are considering being developable. I don't see any developer coming in and using any of these immediately. And that got us to planning as a long-term thing. Maybe not in the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years. But I think wise planning thinks generationally, not annually or biannually. The power in all of these parcels is in the current landholders. They may choose to sell or not sell. And if a developer comes with a deal that the landowners like, then the landowners benefit. They would only sell if they think they benefit. And with the condo association, if 75, 80, 90%, whatever those numbers are, like the deal, then they may sell. Otherwise, no, none of it will be developed. Perhaps in 20, 30, 40 years, the condo association will like the deal that a developer comes to them with. We think that's a great spot to fit the MBTA communities because it does encourage use of mass transit. We think the downtown through the Metro West Regional Transit Authority encourages use of mass transit. We felt like what we came down to was a really nice balance of all of the tensions we had to wrestle with. That the current map will limit explosive growth in the very short run, that it will meet the Commonwealth's requirements of us, that if there is development, it fits in with planning for town growth in a wise way. And the only thing I would say that you guys didn't hit on too much is we were trying to find a way to not limit or take back industrial or commercial areas. We wanted to save and even augment commercial growth. And we feel like the downtown development is a way to do that. If we got mixed development downtown and more people living downtown, that serves all sorts of goals in one fell swoop, including especially Chamber of Commerce goals of expanding commercial tax base. So that was a long-winded way to say, I think you guys have already said everything that I came to say. But that kind of sums up our process over the last year of meetings where we have almost solely focused on MBTA communities. Is that helpful at all?
Yes, very helpful, Ted. Thank you. I said I was going to take 2 more questions, and now I see there's 4 hands raised. We'll take those 4 questions, and then just from a time perspective, we'll go ahead and continue the hearing. But actually, maybe now there's 3. But Leslie? you want to unmute and or come off camera?
Leslie, if you're having trouble, hold Alt and hit A.
Okay, am I unmuted?
We can hear you.
Oh, yay. Okay, I'm Leslie Garber, and I live at 19 Forest Lane in the Preserve. So I have a couple questions, but one is, I live here, and I feel like this town is really kind of they've ignored us. We don't get plowing, we don't get road repair. They just didn't take any of our land. So they don't, when we asked for the water, when it comes by, you guys were pretty non-committal about it. I mean, as a town, we don't get much from you except the schools, and a lot of us don't use the schools. So all of a sudden now you're using us. You're saying, okay, this little group here, they don't have a lot of power. We don't have to do much for them. We'll just stick them in the zoning thing. But would we be able to ask now for something back from the town I mean, it sounds like we don't have a choice if the town votes for it. And I mean, what are we, 50 votes against an entire town? So, I mean, probably it will pass. But I would say we would like our roads taken care of by you. We would like the water when it comes by to be taken. We would like some services from the town then, trash. I mean, you do nothing for us. It was probably a plan of the development when it was done, but I think now you would probably owe us some services for putting us in this position. Because yes, you said we might not vote, but you never know. Like they said, they could change the zoning in the future. Who knows what the state will do? And, you just don't know. So it is a very uncomfortable feeling for us in the Preserve. We bought there because we felt like it was a pretty safe rural place. And now I'm not feeling it's really safe there anymore. The other question is, why wouldn't have you considered Legacy Place as a plan? Those are my two questions.
All right. So I can take the first one, I think, and then maybe I'll defer to Ted on Legacy. But from a services perspective, I think Preserve is managed from a town perspective, like many other condo associations in town, and that's part of the application process. It's part of the approval process to build that. And if the land developer had wanted to build single family homes and petition for a subdivision with a town street, they could have done that as well. But it likely wouldn't have been enabled as many houses to be built, and probably would not have been as profitable for them. So they opted for something different that is just managed accordingly in town. But would the town be willing to make some concessions because of this? I can't speak for the town, but I'm not really sure that this zoning change is going to have any negative consequences. If it had any consequences, they'd likely be positive, because if somebody was willing to come in and pay that premium and to get the entire community on board with it, then the reality is the value of your property just went up a lot of money in doing so. So I'd struggle a little bit to see how this would warrant some special handling of condominium association services. Well,
imagine trying to explain this to a potential buyer, what this means, and trying to convince them that this may or may not have any impact on the future of our condo association. Because now you're doing something special to us. None of the other condos are in this district. So we are now special. We're special in this one way. So I would think that maybe because we're special, there could be, if we decided as a community we'd wanted these services. But I'm just saying, it could impact our sales, because I mean, explaining anything to a person trying to buy your condo when it's not the norm is not going to be an easy thing.
Yeah, that could be. A change in condominium services would be something through the planning board anyway. So I'd be speaking out of line if I said one thing one way or the other. But I'd also say I would expect that as MBTA communities moves forward, there will be a lot of associations that will be in consideration there. So I think it would be speculative on our parts to try to anticipate what negative consequences there would be from this. That's just my opinion. But your second question about legacy farms, and Ted, if you're still on, maybe you could provide some commentary.
We legacy farms came up again and again, so we absolutely talked about legacy farms, and there are several reasons we kept it off the list. If we're simply comparing legacy farms to the preserve, legacy farms is not within that half-mile radius that we found appealing and fit with the spirit of the MBTA Communities Act. But the other thing about legacy farms, and I went back and watched our meeting in October where John Gelsich helped us out with legacy farms. When that whole development happened, there were so many layers of legal agreements poured on top of that land that to then zone it MBTA communities would create a legal labyrinth that town council would have to sift through for a long time to see if we really could put that in the MBTA Communities Act. And given that we were able to get our 50 plus a little bit acres without having to wade through that legal morass, we thought it's not even worth it to consider legacy farms anymore.
All right. Thanks, Ted. Paul.
Sorry, through the chair, before we get to, can I just say something?
Sure, of course.
So there's been a lot of great questions here, and I've gotten a lot of great questions outside of this meeting, but I just want to encourage anybody who has questions to reach out directly to me, and I can have an hour-long conversation with people about these things. You can ask me, you know, a bunch of questions in detail, and we can go through everything that might be better suited in that venue rather than a planning board meeting, in case there's still questions, because I know there's some confusion on how these questions are phrased and then making assumptions that aren't maybe not really equivalent to what we're talking about. So I just really encourage people to reach out directly to me, and I'm happy to have conversations, clear everything up, and kind of explain the whole process and all the little details to everybody. I can do that email, phone, coming to my office, virtual. I'm pretty available any which way. So
thank you. Thanks, John. Paul, welcome back.
Hi, Chair. First time, long time. I just want to say I think this
Paul, sorry, name and address.
Oh, 10 DeCarlo Road, Hopkinton, Paul Ostrander. I just want to say I know a lot of work's gone into this. I think this is very good, and I'm really excited about these plots that were selected. I think it's always important to keep in mind that although this might be one of the more highly attended meetings, there have been maybe 10 for the planning board, and then I don't know, 20 for Zach that's taking care of this. So a lot of these ideas and questions have already been brought up and hashed out and thought of by some really smart people. So I'm all for this. I think this is a great idea. I think it's very important for Hopkinton to continue to be an MBTA community. And that's it. Just thank you for all your hard work. And I'm very excited about the prospect of this.
Thanks, Paul. Rob.
Thanks, Gary. So I more or less wanted to make a few comments because there's so many people on that have probably varied views. As being on the planning board, there's a few different ways I look at it, and not necessarily everybody in the planning board looks at it the same way. There's complying and or not complying in legal risk. So basically all the rapid transit communities that surround Boston have had to comply by now, and so Milton did not. And Milton at town meeting approved an MBTA communities map, and then subsequently a citizens petitions was filed where they got over 10 times as many votes to basically block that zoning. So they go to a townwide vote February 13th. So it's important to look what is happening in other communities. The town of Holden said they weren't going to adopt the MBTA communities. They've had too much growth. It's happening too fast. They can't fund additional growth. So what happened? The Central Mass Housing Authority sued them. Superior Court judge threw out the case, dismissed the case because there was no findings. So there's all these things happening outside of Hopkinton, and it's important for everybody to be as informed as they can be what's happening in other communities. And then I think, so that's one point.
Hey,
And the
Rob,
second
can I
point,
ask you a quick question about that real quick before you get on your next point? Are you aware of any communities that have approved to move forward with MBTA zoning?
the other 11 rapid transit communities, that's basically they're all the towns besides Milton that border Boston. And in reality, they didn't have to do anything. They already have regions that have that density of housing. So they just basically put an overlay district on parcels of land that already had that density. So realistically, for those 11 towns, like you think of Quincy, Braintree, Newton, Brookline, Cambridge, Somerville, Everett, Chelsea, Revere, Malden, they didn't do anything. They basically had land parcels that already had that density. So they just put an overlay district on it and that was done. All the other, so we fall into the next two groups. There's the commuter rail district, which is like Southborough that actually has a commuter rail stop in it. And then we're an adjacent community because we border Southborough, and we have to have something, we should have something in place by the end of 2024. And if we don't, and that's when the Attorney General is risking or threatening towns and communities comply, or you're in big trouble, we're going to sue you, or you're going to get sued, which, let's be honest, they're not going to go sue every town in the state. At least that's my opinion. So the last point I have is I look at it as worst case scenario. Say 750 additional dwelling units were built. That would be basically the size of legacy farms that are excluding the age restricted units. And think about half of those within like a few hundred yards of our center intersection of town. Like in general, the town, I think, would balk at that and not want that. So I'm trying to figure out an avenue to move forward here, because I don't think that's a tenable, viable proposal. Like, yes, it probably won't get built anytime soon, but if it did, that would be have tremendous impact to our schools. The schools, like everybody just knows, we just got approval for Elmwood School replacement, which is going to be about 90 plus million in taxpayer dollars. Hopkins School needs an addition, which is going to be about 40 million. And just look at the school budget and capital projects. It's like they projected about 2 years ago, we needed about 280 million in capital projects, excluding this MBTA communities ever happening. So there's lots of things to consider in terms of the budgeting, if it actually did get built in worst case scenario. And so I look at it as a viable path of where does it financially not make sense to have these parcels? Like if you have the Windsor by 495, they're not going to tear down Windsor apartments to put in basically the exact same dwelling units. So if the town wants to comply, that's the path I look forward, that I look at as the most viable path. Where is it really financially not practical to build this type of project? And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
All right. Rob, just one quick comment on that. I'd be curious to know what it would cost to build 750 units on these parcels that we've identified. By the time you acquire land, by the time you put in necessary services and systems to support them, and not to mention even the downtown district as to how much is even feasible there. Because I don't know. I hear you if it was built, but it's going to be a long time before that's even before even a small fraction of these are able to be built.
So could I just quickly comment through the chair? It's one of those things where, like, if you look at what was Western Nurseries and all the land, the Mezit family bought farms. That's how they bought farm after farm after farm, and they moved from Weston, Massachusetts to Hopkinton, Massachusetts, because they could get land cheaper, and they built a farm, and they bought dozens and dozens of farms and amassed over 700 acres. So they worked that as a active nursery for multiple generations and then eventually they didn't want to do that anymore, and they could they had an opportunity to sell to a developer. I look at this as a similar type of scenario. So it might not happen today, but it's all the economics of it. Is at some point in the future, it probably will make financial sense for the owners of this land, because any property that gets zoned MBTA communities that can build super dense housing instantaneously is worth a lot more money. So if a homeowner or a property owner can all of a sudden sell their property because it's worth a lot more money, all of a sudden that puts risk that they will be sold, and they will be sold faster than we anticipate.
All right, you're entitled to your opinion.
He's right.
So I said that we weren't going to take any more questions, and I apologize to Martha and Peter. We will be continuing this, though, just from a time perspective. We're pretty far into our meeting. We have a few things left. So I would like to entertain a motion to continue this public hearing. And we would continue that to January 22nd. So do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Rob, how do you vote?
Yes.
Jane?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Elise?
Yes.
Matthew?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
Vic?
Yes.
Parker?
Yes.
And Gary is a yes as well. So appreciate a lot of good, lively discussion. Really appreciate all the folks that tuned in. Again, I think to John's point earlier, some ways the best way if you want to have a discussion about this is to reach out to John and work through that, because fortunately a lot of these are challenging topics with a lot of complications that just take time to work through. So, but I really appreciate everyone's engagement. All right, moving on to our second hearing tonight, stormwater regulations. And again, I'm going to lean on John here. Do you want to give us a quick summary of what is being proposed here?
Sure. All right. So as many of you have probably seen in the last year and a half, more recently, the last couple months, flooding has become a more common issue on every development in every neighborhood, pretty much everywhere. We've had catastrophic flooding in central Mass, not just on the Cape anymore. And so that's kind of the impetus for what we're trying to do now. So Mass DEP has a stormwater handbook, and in that stormwater handbook, they set rainfall calculations that are recommended, or at least the base minimum for towns to use. And right now they're proposing that towns move to what's called the NOAA Atlas 14. It's something that's been in place. We actually have it in our bylaws as an option for the planning board to require. But the standard rainfall calculations that we are using in our stormwater regs are the Cornell ones, which are out of date. And the article that I shared with all of you from Scientific American shows that even NOAA Atlas 14, particularly in Massachusetts, is pretty much out of date. They're looking to update that to be NOAA Atlas 15, and they think that that's going to be complete in 2027, but that's still 3 years away. And we don't know if that's actually going to happen. So what we're proposing is to amend the stormwater regulations to remove the Cornell and basically only have NOAA Atlas 14. But the reason why I'm recommending not a vote tonight on this is because we don't really have the final language. There's a concept of NOAA Atlas 14 plus and NOAA Atlas 14 plus plus. And those are forward-thinking designs of the NOAA Atlas 14 rainfall calculations that are meant to better address impacts of climate change in terms of rainfall calculations. I am not an engineer. I am not a stormwater professional. I do not know what language to use to make engineers utilize those numbers. and I'm working with the DPW's consultant at this point to get that information. But we wanted this to be on the agenda. We wanted to start the hearing process, to get it in front of you, to work through it, see if there's anything else that you all see while reviewing stormwater regs that also could be changed. It's not hard to change them because it's just a hearing process, but it's better to just do it all in one fell swoop than to change it a little bit now and then do it again 6 months. So while I'm working on that with the consultant to make sure we're using the proper language to get what we're looking for, I'm also asking all of you to take a look and see if there's anything that you see that stands out that might need to be updated in order to address these stormwater issues that are never going to get better unless climate change is somehow reversed. We're just going to see more precipitation. We're just going to see more flooding. And the infrastructure that is already installed in subdivisions, in developments around town is already out of date, pretty much not maintained the way it's supposed to, especially with HOAs, because they just don't have the expertise. We're trying to address that in a different way, not involving the planning board. But we just recognize that moving forward, the stormwater infrastructure that gets installed needs to be larger, more forward-thinking with respect to climate change and addressing flooding concerns. There's not much we can do about the existing infrastructure, but we can try and make the infrastructure that we're putting in soon and in the future a little bit more receptive to what we are actually experiencing. So that's kind of the general explanation of what the whole process is. You can take a look at the red line stormwater regs. There's not a ton of changes. It's really just the rainfall calculations and a few other things that I noticed. But I just want to make sure that we are moving forward with the complete picture and not just piecemealing this. So I would recommend not taking a vote tonight, maybe not even taking a vote next hearing. We can continue it to February. This is not time sensitive. But I just wanted to present that to you, and if there's any questions, I'm here to answer them.
All right, thanks, John. So what I'm hearing is a homework assignment for us to read through those again, not just the red lines, because I tend to look for red lines and things like that, but to read through them and see if there are other specific areas or topics that that warrant updates. Does that sound about right? Okay. I'm just thinking too, and I know he's not on the call, but I even wonder if it might be worth having the sustainability committee take a look as well. I don't know if that's entirely in their domain. I'm just throwing it out there as an idea, but given there's some knowledge within that group that well, I'm going to scratch that, take that back. Really different. Stormwater versus sustainability, probably not on par. I was just thinking of people that have expertise, but it's probably a little bit different. So I'll take that back. As far as continuing, any questions or comments, or I don't know if people, maybe some people have read through it in more detail and have thoughts or questions about it.
Through the, I guess this is John. Is there any particular guidance, like what to look at, like where? It's kind of an open. I'm feeling it's open-ended question, and I'm not sure what to look for to try to be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty technical document, to be honest. It's an engineering document. So I would just say if you see something that you're like, all right, this doesn't really make sense, you can either clarify with me and we can talk about it. But if you have any knowledge and you're like, hey, this seems like it's out of date, or is this still being used? I'm happy to take any feedback. There's nothing really in particular I'm asking you to look at. I want you all to take a look at it, understand what it is. It's probably good for you all to understand what the engineers are doing when they're designing this infrastructure for developments that come before the town. But really, just if there's anything that jumps out at you as something that you either have a question about or you want to understand a little bit more, or if you know about it and you're saying, yeah, I've seen this being done this way in another town, or we do this in my firm, and so it would work better to do it this way versus the way that it's being done. That would be helpful, but nothing specific.
One other idea might be to think about some of the stormwater issues we've had over the last couple of years, and I think of whether it be just excessive runoff or, basins and whatnot and side slopes. And you think of all the things that we've talked about with regards to stormwater management and some of the places where we've seen some issues, just kind of going through it with a mindset to see if some of those issues we've had are potentially rectified through the bylaw. That might be one way to look at it as well.
Is this initiative concurrent with the recent assessments that the DigSafe teams have been doing out in town, or is this completely separate? I'm just totally connecting those two out of, okay.
Completely separate. This is something that the conservation administrator and I have been talking about even before the DPW director came into her position. And now that she's here, we're talking to her about it. It's just an issue. Concom is always having flooding issues. What was it? 2 summers ago, I think it was 2021, there was just like tons of rain. We had people calling town hall constantly about flooding in their backyard and all these issues. And part of it is the existing infrastructure and developments are not being maintained by the HOAs or by the people. So we're talking to different communities. We're actually talking to Westboro and I want to say Southboro. No, sorry, Westboro and Southboro, maybe. I forget the other town, about potentially doing a stormwater enforcement cooperative to try and address those types of things. So that's kind of a separate initiative, but this would just help future developments make it a little bit easier to control the flooding. Because we've had bad flooding in 21, had bad flooding this year. It's going to keep on happening. Rainfall's not going down.
As someone who had their basement flood in the last one, and some pump installed, it's top of mind for me.
Yeah.
Okay, so John, just from a timing perspective, looking in February 5th, February 26th, when do you think we should continue this to, and then at that point, hopefully wrap it up?
I would say February 5th. I am not going to be here February 26th. So I wouldn't be able to discuss at that point in time, but we can definitely make progress by February 5th.
Well, let's continue to February 5th, but my only ask is if people can go through it in the next week or two while it's still fresh. I think if we wait until February 3rd to go through it, we're that much less likely to take a look at it. So homework assignment is to take a look through that and provide your comments or questions to John. And then I will entertain a motion to continue this public hearing to February 5th, 2024.
So moved.
Second.
And assuming no further discussion, Rob, how do you vote?
Yes.
Jane?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Elise?
Yes.
Matthew?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
Vic?
Yes.
Parker?
Yes.
And Gary is a yes as well. So thanks, John, for the work on that. It's a pain point that we've all seen. So we'll do our homework and circle back with you. So, all right. Well, and I know we do not have minutes from December 4th. So I think that is it for tonight. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
So no further discussion. Rob, how do you vote?
Yes.
Jane?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Elise?
Yes.
Matthew?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
Vic?
Yes.
Parker?
Yes.
And Gary is a yes. All right. Thank you, everyone. Good discussion. Have a great evening. And we'll see you all in 2 weeks.
Good night, guys.
Bye.